Here we go. The interesting story in the Parsha. Vayisu mehor hahar. The Jewish people traveled on. Vayidaber ha'am belokim uva Moshe. The Jewish people spoke against Hashem and Moshe. The Malbim points out in the past they only spoke against Moshe and Aaron, things like this. They kind of, accused them of being imposters. But now they're speaking against Hashem himself. In other words, Moshe is well established. They can't deny that Moshe is legitimate, but they're going to speak against Hashem. So, what do they say? What do they complain about? First thing. So again, this is very significant. This is relating directly to their relationship with God. So, what's God's responsibility? Number one, the first thing that He's expected to do. So it's interesting. It's brought in the Tosfos Yontif brings in Maseches Brachos an observation that when we bench, we say Birkas Hamazon, when we have a mezuman, right? So we all gather together. When you do the mezuman fully and you have 10 men, you add the word Elokeinu. And that's the name of justice. That's the name of din. So din is very different than rachamim. When it's Birkas HaTorah, we say Baruch Hu es Hashem HaMavorach. We talk about Hashem. But here we add in, right, Nevarich Elokeinu she'achal mishalom. So why is it the name of din? So this is in Zayin Gimel, the Tosfos Yontif in Maseches Brachos. He says, because hadin nosein l'chalkel es bru'av. If God is going to create beings, then they should get food. That's it. It's din. It's only just that you should have something to eat. Nobody should starve to death. It doesn't make any sense. Then why did you create them? So if you're going to create them, you got to create a system to keep them going. That's the Tosfos Yontif. Now, it's interesting because if you look at benching, we keep saying Hazana Sa'olam Kulo Betuvo Bechein Bechesed Uverachamim, right? We bring the pasuk No Sein Lachem Lechol Basar Kila Olam Chasto. So Hashem gives food because His kindness is internal and forever. So it's a very interesting perspective that on the one hand, the way that Hashem feeds us is with tremendous, tremendous kindness. If we would have to just drink a cup of motor oil every day in order to keep going, and that's all there was, we do it, right? I mean, it's not, but look what there is. I'm saying there's soups and there's cookies and there's every kind of fruit in the world, and it's delicious and it's colorful. So that's a chesed. I mean, that's a kindness. And in every detail of how it is, it's a kindness. So that foods that are ready to eat right off the tree, so they are colorful and they beckon you. And foods like the potato or something, which are just not an onion, you'd bite into it, it'd be terrible. So it doesn't have that appeal. You understand? Everything about it is chesed. They point out in the Svarim, they point out that foods that are meant to be eaten by one person are extremely tempting on the outside. Right? An apple, a cherry, an orange. And foods that are meant to be shared by a whole family, like a watermelon, so they have just enough color on the outside that you should know that it's ripe somehow, but they're not really so attractive because that would tempt a person or an animal, or it would tempt a person to just take a big bite of it right away because it looks so good. And so until you cut it open and you've brought it back to the clan, to the family, so like everything is done with chesed and kindness and thought. It's not just, look, you need to eat, you need to eat. The Jewish people, therefore, complaining against Hashem, the number one thing that a person can do when they complain against Hashem is say that He's not sustaining them. He's not taking care of them. They don't have enough. They don't have what they need. They don't have food. They don't have sustenance. And that's what they did. They complained about the way Hashem fed them. Lama halisarim mitzrayim. Why did you take us out of Egypt? Lamas b'midbar, to die in the wilderness. Ki ein lechem. There's no bread in the wilderness. Ein mayim. There's no water. V'nafshenu kotza belechem hakilokeil. Our soul is disgusted by this lightweight bread. So, is that right? Is this so late? Maybe. They're disgusted by the lightweight. Yeah, I mean, Aaron and Miriam. So it's late in the game. Yeah. And they say, we're disgusted by this lightweight bread. Now, what's wrong with the bread? Well, you don't have to go to the bathroom when you eat it. It doesn't sound like the worst thing, but I guess where else Are you going to read Golf Digest? They were frustrated. It's very strange. Like, what? You're going to go to the bathroom? They couldn't stand it. It's lightweight bread. Hashem sent a punishment against them of serpents. Vayishlach Hashem ba'am es hanechashim. So Hashem sent snakes. Hasrafim. These are fiery snakes. When they bite, the venomous snakes. Vayinashchu sa'am. They bit the people. Vayamas amrav Yisrael, and a great number of Jewish people died. So the people came to Moshe and they said, Chatanu, we sinned. Ki divanu b'Hashem. We spoke negatively about Hashem, uvach, and against you. Hashem vavach, hispalel al Hashem. Please pray to God and let him take away from us this serpent plague. So Moshe davened for the people. And Hashem responded and he said, okay, make for yourself a saraf, a fiery serpent. Place it on a nace. Place it on a stick, on a banner. Place it up high in the air. And then anybody who gets bitten, they're still going to bite you. But when they bite you, you look at that and it will save your life. And Moshe made a nachash out of nechoshet. Nachash, nechoshet. Now, it doesn't say anywhere that it has to be nechoshet. Moshe came up with this himself. Rashi, Chazal say, Loshon nofel al Loshon. Nachash and nechoshet are remarkably similar words. Nachash is just, it's a tuffet and makes it nechoshet. So he made a copper snake. We'll have to figure out what that's all about. He put it on a stick. And when people would look at that, they would live if they got bitten by a serpent. That's the story. And the whole story is very mysterious and hard to understand why this happened. Okay. There's a whole bunch of different angles. Just first start with Rashi. Rashi says, why did snakes Yavo Nachash Shalaka al Hotzaz Dibo? Let a snake come, because snakes were punished. The snake was punished back in the day for spreading, false ideas. Hotzaz Dibo. And that's what the Jewish people were doing. Lashon hara. V'yifra mimotze diba yavo nachash shekol haminin nit'amim lo tam echad. So again, the snake spoke Lashon hara in Gan Eden. He spoke negatively about God. So now you guys are going to speak negatively about God. You're going to be punished by the snake. Second thing, says Rashi. The snake, every food that it eats tastes the identical taste. Because it says tam offer. It tastes like dirt, because it says you'll eat dirt. And Rashi is explaining it doesn't mean that they literally eat dirt, but it doesn't really have the taste buds to appreciate and enjoy the food. So anything it tastes is motor oil for it. Anything. So no matter what it eats, it's dirt. V'yifra mekfuye tova, and it'll pay back to these people. Shedavar echad. You know what they had? They had man, and man tastes like every taste in the entire world, and they didn't appreciate that. So you have one food that tastes like any taste in the entire world. So I'm going to send you a snake. But no matter what it eats, it tastes like dirt. There's something deep here. Right now, it's just kind of poetic. Gemara Bava Kama. Gemara says a bunch of interesting things. And then at the end, it's talking about different animals. And suddenly it says, Shidro Shal Adam, the human spine. 7 years after a person dies, Nasa Nachash turns into a snake and slithers off. V'hanimili delo kara b'modim, but only if the person didn't bow their back when they prayed modim. So a person says Shemona Esrei, you're supposed to bow down. So if you do that, it won't turn into a snake. Otherwise, you will turn into a snake. Now, in the immortal words of Rav David Einstein in the Shul chat, I don't care if people talk at my funeral. Right? That was his line about, would you like it? Speaking in Shul, someone said, would you like it if people were talking loud at your funeral? He said, I don't care what people do at my funeral. Right? Like 7 years after you die, what's the meaning of this? That your spine, everyone else is decomposed. I mean, is it unpleasant for the spine to turn into a snake? It doesn't say your consciousness will then be attached to. It's a mysterious Gemara. Now, according to Tosfos says there are those who've suggested that this is because there's a bone in the spine at the top of a person's spine, right at the base of where the tefillin go, right at the beginning of the spine, there's a bone called the etzem halus. There's a special bone that is the that is from that tiny little bone is never destroyed, and even fire can't impact it. And that's where Tchias HaMesim comes from. So the dead are revived from that little bone, and that this Gemara is saying that that bone too will turn into a snake, and the person won't be around for the revival of the dead. And Tosa, it's hard to believe that for not bowing at Modim, a person is not going to come back. So he doesn't think that seems like too extreme of a punishment for this crime. But the Zohar does say that. So what Tosfos is saying that he doesn't see why that. The Zohar's opinion is that, yeah, for a person not having that kind of appropriate gratitude to Hashem. Now, we do see in the pasuk here that the people came to Moshe and they were modeh. They said, "We admit we sinned against Hashem and we sinned against you, and we like to be cured." What's going on with this Gemara? What's going on with this Gemara, and what's going on with the story here, and how do they connect? And we're going to explore the Gemara a little bit more as well, a couple different angles. Okay, so here's the first idea. In the Garden of Eden, the very first Nachash, what does he do? So if you look at the Psukim, there's a remarkable conversation that happens. Vayomer el Isha, the serpent was crafty. He was sneaky, he was crafty, and he said to the woman, Avki Amar Elokim lo sochlu mikol eitz hagam? Okay, now just remember, before I translate and explain, just remember, the Nachash is the prototype for the Yetzer Hara in all generations. The Yetzer Hara is personified as the Nachash. The Malbim explains that after the sin of Adam Rishon, every human being is an Adam, a Chava, and a Nachash in one. And the Adam is the one that's hearing the things directly from Hashem. That's the male. And then the Chava is the Nefesh. That's the emotional life. The part that's part, you understand, like the part that actualizes these broad concepts into reality, because that's really what wife is supposed to do. Just in the physical act of procreation, that's what she does. We know that the Gemara says, right, where our sages say anyway, that Zera, right, the human seed begins in the Moach, which now Aaron Feldman wrote something about this scientifically, how that works. And eventually it comes, right, so it's a very cerebral type of process. Then a man could have 1,000 children in theory, but nothing in practice unless one female takes that, actualizes it, and makes it into something. We know that in Chassidus, there's a lot of talk about the Jewish people being responsible to create a dira b'tachtonim. And the idea is there's this metaphor of Hashem being the husband and us being the wife, that for there to be anything practical and substantive and physical and real about spirituality in this world, there has to be some being, some nation to receive it and make it into something. And that's the job. So there's the male and the female aspect. And then in every person, in every man and woman, right, there's the male, female, and the Nachash. And the male-female relationship. It's so interesting because on the one hand, we have this, like, we're the husband, right? And you have sometimes, in other words, Shabbos is the bride. And then, so like in many relationships, a person can have different kinds of, so Klal Yisrael, sometimes the female, sometimes the male, sometimes it's very unique how, a light unto the nations is kind of like the sun to the moon, right? But then Hashem is like the sun, and we're like the moon. So you have a lot of different permutations within this hierarchy. Okay, so the Malbim writes that, and he says the Nachash, therefore, is this being that's the Yetzer Hara, and everything macro in the world is impacted by the way any specific human being behaves. So that if a human being behaves in a way where he empowers the Nachash in his own life, which he talks a little bit about, we'll read a little bit of the Malbim just to see exactly how he says it, then that empowers that power in the world, and that person will get bit by actual snakes. In other words, there'll be a relationship between the things that happen in the external world and the things that happen in one's internal world. And the solution to the things in the external world are actually in a person's internal world most of the time. So the Nachash shows up. So tell me if you've ever heard this voice. Here's the voice. The Nachash says to the woman, Afki Amar Elokim, lo sochlu mikol eitz hagan? Did God say that you are not allowed to eat any of the trees in this whole beautiful garden? That's the words. That's the question. Is that an unbelievable thing? I mean, we gloss that over. And she has to answer back. She says back, Mi pri eitz hagan nochel. The woman said back, no, we are allowed to eat the trees in the garden. When we pri eitz asher b'toch hagan, there's one tree in the middle of the garden, which Hashem said, don't eat from it and don't touch it. because you will die. So I definitely felt this a lot as a teenager, that I was getting this question almost directly out loud from people that were not religious. So they say, wait, you're Orthodox Jew? Yeah. So you're not allowed to do anything, right? Ever, under any, right? Like, you're not allowed to grin, right? And they think we're like some sort of fundamentalist, extreme Islam sect where we've bagged all the women and all the men are sort of walking. That's not it. The answer is no. We can do everything. We can do everything. There's just like this one thing. There's a couple things Hashem said not to do because they kill you, because they're just really bad for you. Like yeah, we have a different way of relating between males and females when we're single kids, but that's because we don't want to die. We don't want, kares. We don't want to destroy our neshamas. We eat delicious food, but we only eat the kosher ones. We don't, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of look at how much you're missing. Jews can't do anything. Look at what you're missing. The Nachash succeeds in convincing Chava to look at the one tree she does not have. If you don't have that tree, you don't have anything. You're not allowed to do anything. And he succeeds, and she then brings it to her husband, which is Adam, and that happens inside of our life. So in other words, the part of us that's the female part, right, is influenced by the Nachash, which brings it back to the male, and then the ideology is off, and the emotions are off, and we're just going after the wrong things. Okay. So that's a little bit of trying to explain the Malbim in simple terms. But what's so interesting, the Nachash then becomes the emblem of the opposite of Hakaras Hatov, of the opposite of a life of gratitude and appreciating what you do have. And instead, it focuses on, my cup is only half full, because that's also a terrible attitude. My cup is half full is a terrible, terrible attitude. It's not a Jewish attitude. Cup is half empty is even worse. But cup is half full is also a terrible attitude. My friend Rabbi Cavalier Shlita, his brother davens by our shul. He's Rabbi Daniel Cavalier. He said, he made this point to me. He said, David HaMelech says, Kosi Rivaya. My cup is overflowing. And that's the right attitude. You have what you need. You have what you need. You have everything you need. And any attitude other than that, well, I have half of what I need is better than I have half of what I don't need. And they're both nonsense. They're both sheker. They're not. Okay, so listen, if you're one of those people who walks around saying, I like to be cup half full, we know what you mean. I'm not really attacking that person who's just said that to you as like that person's rotten. It's good. They mean I'm being positive about things. But in real life, you have what you need. You have everything. Focusing on the thing you don't have, here's what happens. If you appreciate the food you do have, the man, then you can find in that food every taste in the world. There's no delicious taste in the universe that you cannot find right now in your own family, in your own home. It's available if you appreciate what you have. And if you don't appreciate what you have, you can have all the delicacies in the world and it will all taste like dirt. And therefore, a lot of times people have this attitude. If I just had more money, if I just had more something. But the problem is, marbe nechasim marbe daiga. A person that has more money, they also have more worries. So it doesn't solve your problem. The only thing that solves the problem is bitachon. It's the only thing. The only thing that solves is inner peace, which comes from trust and bitachon. If a person doesn't have that, then they have nothing. So that, you know what happens with the Nachash? He is the wealthiest animal in the world. Parnasasa Mitsuya. Listen to this. It's brought in the Svarim. It really goes back, I think this Vart goes back first to the Rebbe of Vorka. That's where Amshanov comes from. The Mendel of Vorka. Here's the story. They asked him like this. Rav Bonim of Shischa maybe also quoted as saying this. But the Shemi Shmuel quotes it a bunch of times from the Vorka Rebbe. They said like this. The question was, why do you sometimes find? Here's how they bring it with Rabbunim. They say, why do you sometimes find that a really wicked person has such an easy time financially, and a righteous person, right, just struggles so terribly, and they have to work so hard to make a few cents? Hillel Hazake. Hillel was so righteous. He was so good. And he nearly died of freezing to death because he didn't have the money to get the base medrash. Like Hashem couldn't have sent him an extra few dollars. There's so many wicked people out there. I've heard another thing like this. You know, you have somebody who's just struggling for a child or for something, and you say, like, look around the world, Hashem. There's millions of people, rotten people, wicked people, who are having children every minute. You don't have an extra kid that you could give my friend. You understand? Like, it's such a hard thing to understand. So they asked him this about finances. Of people really struggling to bring food. This was not like today, where no matter what, nobody's not going to have bread for their children. This is when there was no bread for the kids. When people died in the winter, when they didn't have enough food and their children died of starvation. I mean, it really happened. So why would someone suffer like that? So Rabbunim said, you know, a person who doesn't have to worry about making a living, they could fall into the trap of not ever having to look up to God and raise their eyes and say, Hashem, I need your help. Because they're doing so well. And they lose a relationship with Hashem. A person who on a regular basis has to turn to Hashem and say, listen, I need your help. So that person develops a meaningful relationship with God. And he says that's what it means, said the Rebbe of Varka. Is a Kemoav shekoes al beno. Imagine a father who got so mad at his child that he said, Lech me al panai. I want you to go away, and I don't ever want to talk to you again. Not only that, right? I'm going to make sure you don't come back. Here's an unlimited credit card, and here's the keys to the apartment in Miami. It's a penthouse apartment, and I say apartment, but it's bigger than 3 of my houses, right? You have whatever you need here. Just don't talk to me again. That's what Hashem did to the Nachash. He said, all the rest of the animals. So it says, for example, Hakfirim shoagim l'teref ulevakesh mekel ochlam. The young lions, they roar looking for food. Whenever you see one of these nature videos, part of the story is often the lion is starving. And then they're able to, one of them, you know what? Generally, it's the, you have a pasuk. Kfirim rashu v'ra'evu v'darshe Hashem lo yachzu tov. The kfir, the young lion, the young powerful lion. Kfir means that it protects the other lions. So that's important, like kofer, kapara. So it covers over for the other lions. So the young powerful lion has gone hungry. Rashu v'ra'evu has been impoverished. V'darshe Hashem lo yachzu tov. But those who seek Hashem never lack anything good. Does everyone recognize that pasuk from benching? Right? Right. So Nara Yisi already, you can't promise that everyone will do because it's not Natilas Hashem, right? But this is very important. Kfirim rashu v'ra'evu v'darshe Hashem lo yachzu choltov. The young lion. So the question is, what does it mean that the lions? I remember once seeing a really, really interesting thing on an airplane, that it showed this mother lion, and she was walking around with these 2 babies. And there were some other animals around. I don't know what it was. I don't remember, hyenas or something, who would tear apart these baby lions if the lion goes to hunt. So the problem is it has this massive problem. It has dueling imperatives. It's got to get food for these kids and for itself, and it's getting weaker and weaker every day, but it can't leave them unattended. You see that? In other words, kfirim rashu v'ra'evu. Even the young lions will sometimes be hungry. The darshe Hashem, but if you're seeking Hashem, you don't lack anything because He'll take care of your babies. He'll take care of whatever it is. You totally can trust. You don't have to be the one to protect these. It's a very beautiful pasuk. Hakfirim shogim laterf. They roar because they need to get food. Ulavakesh mekel ochlam. In other words, they're asking Hashem for their food. That's what the animals are doing. Now, this may all just be a metaphor, but it's still a beautiful metaphor. It may be that the animals have some awareness that food comes from somewhere in nature and they need to, from God, whatever they can understand about, right? The animals can understand they have an owner, so maybe they can, I don't know. But the pasuk, so therefore, as opposed to other animals that do that, the snake can eat anything. That's what it means. Afar tochal parnasasa mitzuya. It can eat just about anything and be fine. That's how they understood that. Okay, so if that's the case, then we'll get back to this. The bitachon part of it, but now we understand it. Shidra Shalom, the spine of a person, which is supposed to bow down and say modim, thank you to Hashem, and that's the opposite of being a snake. It says kizakif. The Gemara says when you stand up, you should stand up like a chivya, like a serpent, like uncoiling, like you can picture like the boa uncoiling. So a person should come up slowly and be like a serpent. So standing up is a serpent, and bowing to Hashem and saying, "I'm grateful for the things I have. They're from you, and I'm grateful for them." So that is the opposite of a snake. A person who in his life, that's what the Gemara says, 7 years after he dies, and some of them are first, and then Yaakov says, why does it take 7 years for a person's spine to turn into a snake? Because the Gemara says elsewhere that snakes, there's the boas and others, it takes them 7 years from conception until birth. So it's like the birth of a snake. That's what you've brought to this world. That person has just brought more nachash to the world, more denial of God, more snake. And therefore, we could say the Gemara means that his spine turns into a snake. If he didn't about that at Modim, he is really a snake. That's who he is. That's who he will remain. Okay, that's a very powerful thing. Now, it's important because the human being will never, ever get away from the delusion that actually there is something else. Like we quoted this in the men's share. It was in passing because it was a response to question and answer. So it takes us a second just to let this sink in. The Medrash says in Koheles, Ein Adam Mes. No person has ever died in this world. All the people who've died, none of them ever has ever died v'chatzi ta'avosav biyadu, with half of their fantasies achieved. No person ever has achieved half of their taiva, which means you think, no. If I get that, I'll be fine. I'll die a happy man. It's not true. You won't. There's a part of your brain called the nachash that produces this. And it makes you constant. This is a part of the human experience that you're always yearning for more. You're always yearning for more. And if you have 100, you want 200. You have 200, you want 400. You cannot get even half of what you desire because you automatically want more and more and more. And therefore, a person has to learn and make peace with the idea that that's fake and that's not real. And the solution is to focus in on the things I do have. Even something as small as like eating a raisin. I'm telling you, try this challenge. Like, take an actual raisin and put just one, between your fingers and put it on your tongue and spend a minute chewing it 4 or 5 times before you swallow it, just one raisin, and you'll experience something that you never experienced, even though you've eaten gallons of raisins in one sitting. And okay, maybe you have done this, right? Maybe you went on a mindfulness retreat once and they did, but you understand, like, it's a very deep thing that there's so much joy in so many little things. You have a lot of times we don't appreciate it till it's gone. Then there's this is a very important one also, that the minute the Yetzer Hara lets you romanticize everything from the past. So in other words, a person who right now might be having another child, they're not sure. So the Yetzer Hara is going to tell you, don't do it. Remember how hard it is to stay up at night, how difficult that period was. The Yetzer Hara is going to push a person and say, you have enough kids. What do you need it for? Prove who's way too big of a mitzvah. Don't do it. Yeah, you need to travel. You need, what's it going to do to your body? The minute that a person's past that stage, then they're going to stand there and say, like, my little baby is so big. Remember when I could hold them at 2 a.m. and it was so peaceful and I was bonding with, you understand? And like what it takes as a wise person is to try to create moments where when you're holding a little baby at 2 o'clock in the morning and you got to wake up, I got to get up at 6 o'clock. This is not the right time for you to be screaming and tantruming, to realize like one day this little sweet child is going to grow up and move out of my house. And all I'm going to wish is that I was just back in those days when they were so cute and small. You understand? So this is always the case. The kids who come up to me that were in my bunk in summer camp who were terribly homesick and complained night and day, they come back and they tell me now, like, those are the best weeks of my life. Camp was the best thing in my life. And that's truly what they remember, because you don't romanticize any of the bad stuff. It's just the good stuff. This is why, instead, this is why it says in Koheles, Al Tomar, never say, Mehaya, Sheyamim Harishonim Hayatovim Me'elu. Never say, oh, what happened? The old days were so much better than now. This is not an intelligent question. Meaning, in the moment, there's all the challenges, there's all the Yetzer Haras, and so you don't remember the anxiety. You just remember, oh, it was so nice. It was so wonderful. It's very important to try in the moment to see all those things that we're going to romanticize later, to try to appreciate them now. There's a lahavdil. Okay, but you know what? Why not? But we're not the most conventional. Who here has heard of Trace Adkins? Anybody? Okay, so that's okay because we're in the north, because California is north of Mexico. Um, let me get the lyrics. It's country music stars on the. It's a beautiful song. It's like a Musser Schmooze that I would have heard from him. You have that sometimes in country music, where it's just a healthy message, right? Nobody's murdered an elderly person in the song and grabbed their purse and scampered off. It's just a song, you know, about something nice. So listen to what it says. She was staring out the window of their SUV, complaining, saying, "I can't wait to turn 18." She said, "I'll make my own money and I'll make my own rules." Mama put the car in park there out in front of the school, and she kissed her head and said, "I was just like you. You're going to miss this. You're going to want this back. You're going to wish these days hadn't gone by so fast. These are some good times. So take a look around. You may not know it now, but you're going to miss this." Before she knows it, she's a brand new bride in her one-bedroom apartment, and her daddy stops by. He tells her it's a nice place, and she says, "It'll do for now." She starts talking about babies and buying a house. And he shakes his head and said, "Baby, just slow down because you're going to miss this. You're going to want this back. You're going to wish these days hadn't gone by so fast." 5 years later, there's a plumber working on the water heater, the dog barking, the phone's ringing, one kid's crying, one kid's screaming, and she keeps apologizing. And he says, "They don't bother me. I got two babies of my own. One's 36 and one's 23. And it's hard to believe, but you're going to miss this. And you're going to want this back." That's the song. Okay, I recommend listening to the song. Is a deep, powerful voice. You know, he's not Shalom Lemmer because he has a bass voice, but also he's not a yid and he doesn't have that kind of hearts. But it's a very, very powerful song, in my opinion. And if you can listen to that without then getting dragged into a whole world of never listening to Jewish music again, because you become, and you're going to move to Memphis, like if you can, if you can do it, it's powerful. What am I saying? That the Gan Eden was stolen. Listen carefully. Eternal paradise was stolen from Adam and Chava if they the moment they started looking at the one thing they don't have. That's what's ruining your life. That's what's ruining our lives. And learning to appreciate what we do have and be so grateful for what we do have is everything. And a person who doesn't have that, they're not appreciating Hashem. They're denying Hashem in such a tremendous way because He's providing for us. We have everything we need. Okay. Now, a person who doesn't see himself as needing anything, he doesn't bow at Modim. He feels comfortable. He feels like he has everything. So that person is Nachash like. That's why the land of Israel, it says in the Torah, it says that the land of Israel, Ein Eretz Mitzrayim Shosa Me Geshamim. Mitzrayim doesn't drink any rainwater. It doesn't require rainwater. The Nile provides so much that's all you need. And the land of Israel, on the other hand, has nothing like that and it relies entirely on rain. And the pasuk actually highlights this difference. The pasuk speaks out explicitly. Let me see if I can. Here we are. Ki haaretz. This is Devarim 11. Listen, this is like an explicit pasuk. Ki haaretz asher ata basham l'rishta. The land that you come to inherit. Lo eretz Mitzrayim. It's nothing like Egypt. Asher yotzasa misham, where you left. Asher tizra es zaracha, where you plant your seed. V'hishkisa beraglecha kegan hayarak. And it's taken care of easily. It drinks. Haaretz asher tam over from the Rishta. The land you're going to is Eretz Harim uvekaos. It's a land of hills, mountains. Limtar hashamayim tishtemai. You will drink water if it rains. Eretz asher Hashem Elokecha doresh osa tamid. God is constantly engaged with this land. Einei Hashem tamid einei Hashem Elokecha ba. God's eyes are always trained on the land of Israel. May rashis Hashana v'arach Rishana. So, isn't that fascinating? And then it goes into the next words are v'hayim shamati yishma'u mitzvosai. If you listen, then the nasati mita'atz chambito yom hakadosh. We say in Shema, then it's going to rain for you. And if you don't, it won't. You're going to be constantly engaged with Hashem. He's going to be involved in your life. So that's a tremendous thing. You notice in the wilderness, the people keep saying, it was so much better in Egypt. Let's go back to Egypt again and again. What is his obsession with Egypt? The answer is these are the two paradigms. There's either you're in the land of Israel where, look, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but it's a real relationship and you're engaged with God and you know where you stand, right? It says about the husband and wife in Bereshis, Zacha Ezer, Lo Zacha Kenegdo. Person is meritorious, then his wife is nice to him. And if he's not meritorious, she fights with him. Okay, listen. Some say, most of the Mepharshim, by the way, learn Zacha b'mazalo. Yeah, that Zacha means if you had the right mazel. That it doesn't necessarily, there are very nice people who have very difficult spouses, one with the other, so you can't necessarily say. But some of the Mepharshim do say that, no, it's straightforward. And there's a truth to that also, that in a marriage, the way that another person behaves in a good and healthy marriage kind of depends on how you behave. That's what a relationship is. That's what a good relationship is. You behave nicely. You treat another person with respect. You really build them up. And that's the answer to every single time that anybody has come to me to talk about their marriage. 100% of the time, that was the answer. If you can do the right things on your end and mirror those things, it'll have an enormous impact on the relationship. And when a relationship can't be saved, it's because one of the two people is so refusing to do any of their part that there's nothing the other person can do. But the ones that come to me are not those situations. I'm just telling you, they're not those situations. They're situations where a person can influence that. And it's the same thing with Hashem. He says, we're going to have a relationship where sometimes you're not going to have rain. And that's because it's a relationship. I'm not throwing you out of the house. You're going to live in my house, and I'm going to be a little disappointed if you don't behave nicely. But I want you here, and I want you with me. And that's a better relationship. That's a real relationship. Okay, so the spine turns into a snake. And it remains a snake. So I want to share with you a couple things in the Malbim, how he brings this up. On this story of the Nachash and Nachoshes, the Malbim brings up this Gemara. You see, the Malbim is a very interesting sefer. The Malbim was written during the time that the Reform movement was taking root. So one of a couple of his jobs that he saw in writing the commentary, it seems, was to respond to Reform about two things. Number one, that the oral Torah is authentic, because they would mock many of the stories of the Gemara, things that sound a little far-fetched. Gemara tells you something turns into a snake, so they would make fun of it. And so he would want to show how much wisdom there is in it, and that it's a melitza. He says here at the end, it's a turn of phrase to express an idea that's very beautiful, and he explains it. Another thing is to show that the psukim really mean what our sages said they mean. So, in other words, some people will look and say, well, it says an eye for an eye. The rabbis came and they twisted that whole thing. And no, he would show. So that's one of the things about the Malbim. So this is an example of the latter. So it says like this. The spine of a person after 7 years turns into a snake if he doesn't bow down and mow. And so he quotes the Gemara. And then he says as follows. He says, I've explained earlier in Bereshis what I told you before, that the serpent is now inside each and every person, who has a little bit of Adam, Chava, and Nachash. Every person has that. He says, what does the snake do that's inside of a person? He says, well, a human being has a soul, and that soul is totally pure. But then he says, let me find the words exactly. He says, a person has a nefesh. The nefesh is something sort of like in between the soul and the body. He says, what a person is supposed to be doing in this world is to turn this nefesh into something spiritual. The nefesh is in between. You see, we say every day, like we say in davening, Elokai neshama shenasata bi tahorahi. God, the soul that you gave me is pure. So who's talking? The person. So the person has a soul. Aren't you your soul? What am I, my body? Who's talking? So the answer is there's something in between where the soul comes to rest and the body's here. And our goal is to have our nefesh, that life force, identify fully with the soul and become connected to the soul as opposed to become connected to physicality.
You're saying that after you wake up, so your neshama's already been instilled in you. So who's saying that is your good neshama.
Okay, but neshama shenatata bi, it's me talking. The neshama that, do you understand? It was I am some sort of combination of a body and a soul. My goal is to elevate the physical so that it doesn't, so that this nefesh becomes eternal by attack. This is how the Malbim says. Okay. In other words, this is the idea of elevating the physical. It's not, we're not here to like detach from the physical. We're here to turn our yearnings and desires. What gives you pleasure in life? What gives you happiness? A holy person, a good person, learns to get intense and meaningful pleasure out of giving, right? And out of all the mitzvahs of the Torah, all the elevated kind of pleasures. And a lowly person can't really get past just a bottle of alcohol or a drug or something really grub. And most people are kind of somewhere in between. And the goal is, that's a good double entendre, right? Grub and grub, right? Grub a mensch eating grubs off the ground. So it's a Yiddish word, which means like, ugh, I guess grub, yeah. So, and then in the middle is like a person who's trying to, okay. Now what happens, he says, when a person doesn't do that in life, then for all of eternity, they've turned themselves into a nachash. That's who they will be for all of eternity. In other words, their potential that they had to become attached to their soul, become spiritual, is no longer actualizable. They're dead, and they went the other direction, which is quite a striking thing to say. But I want to show you one more thing here. That's extremely. This was a very surprising source when I first learned it. Let me just hope I can find it quickly right here. Okay. There is a form of Gehenna, which is called Kaf Hakela, and it's referred to in the pasuk. It means like the kaf, the spoon of the slingshot. It's usually described as a person's soul being like flung from one edge of the universe to the other, which is just totally mysterious to try to understand what such a thing could mean. The Yefei Anaf and the Medrash in Koheles talks about this. Yefei Anaf is Shmuel Yafa Ashkenazi in the 1500s, a very, very important early source. And he says like this: Shamati Omrim. I believe the earliest source for this, for what he's saying, Shamati Omrim, if I'm not mistaken, it's the Akedas Yitzchak or Yitzchak Arama. May even go earlier than that, but that's Shamati Omrim. He says, here's what I learned from Arabic. She'inyan yiridas haneshama b'toch yud beis chodesh mitoch hergela b'inyanei haguf b'hiyasabo. He says in the first 12 months after a person dies, the soul is very confused, and it keeps for 12 months coming back down to the body and trying to make sense of this idea that it wasn't the body all along. Nisha batzad kosef upshuka elav. It yearns for its former life in the body, in the physical world. And after about 12 months, it loses that for the most part and doesn't come back. But me'onesh harishim, here's the punishment that comes to wicked people. Sheyaflig hacheshek hazeh benafshim. They yearn for this intensely and in a prolonged way. They yasmid, and it just keeps going. And the soul is mevakesh hahana'a hachomrit. The soul desires. So this person is dead, but they're just desiring food. They're desiring sexuality. That's what brings them real pleasure in life and nothing else. But they don't have a body. So they're completely flung from what they keep flying back to this part of the universe, yearning for this, and there's nothing for it because you become in life whatever you become. The punishment is not, you understand? The punishment is not some sort of cruel punishment. It's the result of who you are. You became a snake, and that's what you desire. And therefore, that inyan ha-she'ol. This is what it means in Tanakh when it talks about a soul going down to She'ol. Whoever you are when you die, nidonis me inyan she'ela shetishal ha'anos. She'ol means she'ela. It's just asking. It is shoel ha'hanaot ha'gufaniot velo timsa. It's just looking for physical pleasure. Whoever you become, if you're a jealous person in this life, and that's a big part of you, then that's who you are. This is what it means. This world is the waiting room for the next world. The next world is a world filled with high-level spiritual pleasures that are so deep and enriching. They're so much more pleasurable than anything this world can offer. And this world is a training ground to try to become the sort of person who enjoys those things. I want to share with you also something from Avigdor Miller said about this. So there was a story in the Gemara. The story says, Onkelos the convert. Remember the story? Onkelos Ager was interested in converting to the Jewish people. Now, he had a problem. He was contemplating this very important step. Right? You open up the Chumash, Onkelos is right here. Yeah, he made the right decision. But he wasn't sure in the beginning. And the Gemara tells a story. He sought advice from someone, he wanted to go up and have some, so he said, what's he supposed to do? So he went to necromancers, people who could bring up the spirits of the dead. And he wanted to know what's the story with these people. So he tried to contact the soul of Bilam. Now, says Rav Miller, ordinarily nothing would have happened. To try to find something out by means of necromancy is a waste of time and money too. But this is a very great soul in the making. And so Hashem wanted to aid him in his quest, and he granted him a vision. How exactly it happened is not important for us to know, but he was given an apperception in order to guide his path. So Bilam was dead 1,400 years already. 1,400 years. It's a long time since he was shipped off to the warmer climates, says, yeah? He's in Gehenna, 1,400 years. And the fires are still going strong. And he told Onkelos says, should I attach to the Jewish people? So first he says, he says, it's no good where I am. It's terrible. I'm suffering terribly. Okay. Bilam. He acknowledged. Bilam says to Onkelos, it's terrible here. And then he says, who's important in the next world? He says, the Jewish people. I mean, he has to tell the truth, right? The Jewish people are the important. It's Yisrael that's chashuv. So he couldn't deny that. And now Onkelos asked him the most important question. He said, what would you say to me if I tell you I'm considering joining the Jewish people? So Bilam said to him, Lo sidro shlomam v'tovasam. Don't seek the welfare of the Jewish people in any way. Do not join them. Have nothing to do with them. Now, this is a strange advice. It's a big puzzle. Because he knows the truth. He's in the Olam. He just said the Jews. And the answer is, Bilam isn't suffering Gehenna from fires. He's suffering from his mental attitudes. In his mind, there's a fire that's burning without end, a fire of the wrong ideas that he can't get rid of. The attributes, ideals, and deos that you acquire in this lifetime, that's what you take with you forever, and you'll never shake loose of them. And therefore, when he was asked a personal question, he answered the way he would have answered in this lifetime, because there's no way out of that. When asked a factual question, he has to tell you the facts. That's who you are, whatever you accomplish in this lifetime. The Rambam, in his commentary to Shmona Prakim. His commentary called Shmona Prakim and Pirkei Avos. He says the following line. He says, Tachlis ha'adam lahasig hamuskalos. The purpose of life is to achieve intellectual enlightenment. Muskalos, to enlighten your mind. That's the purpose of life. And it's very hard to understand. Like, what about being a good person, right? What about doing the right thing? Don't we talk about the mitzvahs of that? And the answer is no. That's the purpose. The purpose of all the mitzvahs and all the good things we do is to train our mind and to train our way of thinking and our way of being so that we're a higher level human being. The Rambam doesn't mean to be some sort of abstract armchair intellectual who says intelligent things and isn't kind. That's not what he's saying. He's saying to really refine ourselves to the point where what brings us joy, brings us happiness, we change our thought patterns, we start being appreciative people instead of the nachash. The key of all of this is the awareness that Hashem is good. He gives us what we need. Life is wonderful. And we don't want to be a nachash. We don't want to be a snake. We want to be a serpent. The thing that pulls us away from Gan Eden is this desire for things that we don't even really want, would bring us no happiness, that no one has ever achieved. No person can ever get any of those things. You can't quell that. And instead of being pulled away to nonsense, which will then run after for all of eternity, it will be you should think before you get caught up in a behavior or in a pattern of things. Is this who I want to be forever and ever and ever? Is this, because that's what I'm training myself for. And the alternative instead is to deeply be appreciative of the things that we do have and not get caught up in taiva, which is the opposite of hakaras hatov. Hakaras hatov, I'll finish with this, just clarity. Hakarat hatov doesn't mean gratitude. It means just acknowledging the good. It's just acknowledging the truth. And kafui tova, which is ingratitude, it's the language you used here, doesn't mean being ingrateful. It means covering up the good that's really there. So you're just refusing to see it. It's a part of us that's like, no, I can't allow that to make me happy because why? Just be happy. Just be happy with what you have. Be happy with your spouse. Be happy with your children. Be happy with your community. Be happy with your financial state. It's absurd that any one of us could not be happy with our financial state, because but I don't own, I only rent, but I don't this, but you have more than Shlomo. I'm saying you have a shower in your house, and you have a car that could drive 100 miles an hour, and you've never been hungry a day, and you're like, this is better than everyone in world history. But it could be this and it could be that, and that's what takes Gan Eden away from every person in this world. So just practical advice: if you want to live in Gan Eden right now, right, you just have to really be strong and firm with this nachash. Just don't allow it in. It's just false. Tell yourself, this is not real. I don't want this. This is not the right feeling. I want to sit here and enjoy the things I do have because they're so wonderful and they're so amazing. And a person who has that is really on the path to avoid the kafakela, to avoid going out of this world, having turned themselves into a nachash, because all it takes is bowing properly at Modim, saying a real thank you, being deeply grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the things that he gives us, and that is the path to Gan Eden. There's so much more we could do. I mean, we could talk about why it's nechoshes and why, like, it's endless. But one thing at a time. I have no idea. I don't know. It's a good question. The truth is that the Gemara says, it's a Mishnah that says the maximum is 12 months. And that, depending upon the person, if they're a righteous person, it can be significantly less. So that's one of the reasons that we don't say Kaddish a full 12 months. Because if a person you knew, it says in Shulchan Aruch, it says in the Farshim that if you knew